I've got another interview session coming up here, another discussion. We're going to talk about migrating an application from older versions of Windows to all the new stuff, something that I think all of us can appreciate and use. I'm going to let me bring in here's my friend Kayla Cinnamon. Hey Kayla,
Hey.
how you doing? So, gosh, you've had a big day today. I saw a couple things out there on Twitter. Why don't you tell folks what you're responsible for?
So I am the program manager for Windows Terminal, and we did have a release scheduled for today, but we've actually postponed it to next week. We found some bugs late last night
Oh
that
no!
we'll have to hold. Yeah, but I'm happy to talk about what's coming
Now,
since we're open source anyway. So
did I also see somewhere that it's your anniversary at Microsoft?
yep, today is my 2-year anniversary. So I started in 2019.
We got to celebrate that. Congratulations. That's
Thank you,
great.
thank you.
Gosh, 2 years with the company and making a huge difference with Windows Terminal. Windows Terminal's been around forever. We've had a console. I can just type Windows run and type CMD and it does something.
Mhm.
What led to the decision here to say, hey, we want to update and make a new terminal?
Yeah, so we always had CMD, which runs what we call conhost. And about, I guess it'd be 4 or 5 years ago now, we had been getting a lot of requests asking for better font support. Emojis in the terminal was a big one. I know, who'd have thought? Um, and like background images, things like
Okay.
that. And we tried to do some changes to the original console experience, but since console has been around for so long, there's a lot of systems and people that rely on that window to look exactly how it does without changing anything.
Oh,
And
wow.
it'll launch in the exact same place on the screen in the exact same window size for their program to run. And nobody wants to touch that code because it works. So if
Yeah.
we change anything in that UI experience, we could break a lot of people. Even something
Okay.
simple like padding would just totally tank big productions, which we don't want to do that. So our next option was to start fresh with a new terminal and build on top of what we already had. So that's how
Okay.
Windows Terminal came to be. So CMD and PowerShell also, they use a thing called conhost that I mentioned. So PowerShell and CMD are the shell underneath, and then they'll
Okay.
send their text messages to not text, but like messages of text to
Yeah,
to
they're strings.
conhost.
Yeah.
They're strings, yeah, to conhost, and that's how it's interacting with the front end.
Okay.
And then we added some layers on top of that to make terminal. So one of them is the conpty, which is our pseudo terminal, and that will take Win32 strings and translate it into virtual terminal sequences if it's not already VT, because like things
Okay.
like Bash and Windows Subsystem for Linux will send VT because they're already in Bash. It's a whole technical mess down there. And then it goes up the chain, and we added a terminal control, which is listening for those messages from the conpty, and then on top is the terminal application itself. And that's where you see the tabs and the background images and things like that. That's where the terminal app comes in as the frontmost layer of that stack. And that's made with WinUI and XAML. And the whole
Okay.
thing is a Win32 C++ application that's open source.
Okay.
So that's
But
like
with
in short how we did it.
right, but this is a great little study of how something that was simple, it was built how many years ago, has been leveled up and brought to something that's modern and cool and interesting, and folks are gravitating towards, hey, I want to be in the terminal on Windows.
Mhm.
And gosh, building C++ and XAML, and now you've got that open source, you've got community involvement. What was that like to take and say, well, we want to open source this, we want to get the community involved?
Yeah, that was actually a really cool thing that we did. And we hit like go public at Build in 2019 at the booth. So that was kind of cool. And we open sourced in front of everyone standing around the booth. But it's cool because that's some of the first bits of Windows that have ever been open sourced, is that console code. So that was a really big milestone for us, especially on the team, And then since then, we've gotten a ton of really good contributions. To me, all the cool stuff comes from the community. We just make it work, but the community makes it cool, in my opinion. Like background image support was from the community. The cool retro effect pixel shader, the original implementation. We've added more pixel shader support now as of last release, but that was also from the community. And some coloring the tab to a new color, that's also a community contribution.
Okay.
So yeah, all the cool stuff is not us. It's everyone else. We just give you the place to do it. So that's pretty cool.
Seeing themes being released by some folks that say, oh, here's some stuff to copy into your settings file so that you can make it look a certain way with a certain background. There's things there that are pretty cool that, gosh, are just the tip of the iceberg here. What are some of the new things that you're planning? We've seen that there's a little bit coming with the settings user interface, but as we look forward to that next release and the ones after that, what kinds of things do you plan going forward?
So in 1.6 that we just released last month, the settings UI, we finally unveiled after working on it for many months. So that was a really exciting point in the terminal's growth and timeline. And that's only in preview. So that was our big thing that came out along with the pixel shaders, and the progress ring was another cool one in 1.6. And then 1.7, which was scheduled for today, that is coming next week, that has more improvements to the settings UI. We've added an actions page so you can see all of your key bindings, because there's a lot of cool stuff you can do with your keyboard in terminal, but no one really knows about it. So that's a really good way to tell people how to use your keyboard to interact and like make a new pane or anything like that. So that's been added. And then we also are adding Proto Extensions, is how we call it, or JSON fragment extension support. And this is one of my favorite things, because I think it opens up the floor for a lot of new contributions from the community. But we're allowing for a JSON blob or a JSON file that's come from externally. If you install it properly, then the terminal will recognize it as part of your settings and apply those changes. So let's say someone like Ubuntu wanted to ship like the Ubuntu purple with the Ubuntu logo or icon as their icon. They can ship it in their package, and then when you install Ubuntu, your Ubuntu will look purple with the icon.
Oh, very cool.
So, and then it goes into things like, oh, there's a website called Terminal Splash that a community member made, and there's a ton of color schemes on there. Well, now they'll be installable, that you can import a color scheme that way, and then you don't have to copy the JSON and plop it into your settings.json. So there's a ton of things you can do with this like underlying functionality that we just created that's coming next week. It's all in GitHub, so if you want to play with it, you're more than welcome to. But
so there's the terminal splash.
Big one. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so it's all color schemes, but the way that the JSON fragment extensions work, you can also ship a background image or an icon also in the same folder, and that's the extension. And then when you install it, the terminal will recognize those pieces. So it's not only color schemes, which is here. So it would build on to the whole theming thing, especially for the community.
Oh, very
so
cool.
Yeah, so that's coming. We're just still ironing out some bugs, so it should be a next week release, which is cool. And then another. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to ask the GitHub repository. I was going to navigate there real quick for folks.
Yeah.
GitHub.com. What is it? Windows
/ Microsoft / terminal.
Microsoft.
I type it every day. I send it everywhere.
Yeah, there we go. It's very cool. Now, do you have community folks contributing features, working on issues here?
Oh, all the time. And to the point where when I write our blog posts, I say thank you to every person that's made a new feature or something, and most of them are community member features. The latest one was read-only panes. See, and this is for 1.7 coming out next week. You can tell a pane to stay read-only. So then if you try to put any input into it, or if you try to close that pane, you'll get a pop-up saying this pane is read-only. Don't mess with it. And then until you toggle it off. So that's nice if you're running a build or something that you don't want to interrupt or accidentally key into or something.
Have a running log going by of system process. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's a cool one that's coming. And another one that I believe is from the same community member, he did pane focusing when you hover over it with the mouse. So if you have a bunch of panes open, you just mouse over to whatever pane you want to focus in, and the focus will automatically go to that pane, and then you can start typing right away without having to click anything.
Okay.
So that's another community made feature as well. But yeah, we get community features all the time, and they find all kinds of cool stuff to add. So it's been really awesome to work with the community for this stuff.
I seem to remember I think it was Christina Warren said, wouldn't it be great if we had stories for terminal? And that just feels weird. I don't know.
I don't even know what you would put as your story. Like, here's the latest build that I ran. I don't know. It was funny, and I love Christina, and there's no way we'll put stories in there. That just doesn't make sense to me.
We need a user story for terminal stories.
Yeah, that's what we need first.
Yeah.
If there's a good reason, maybe, but I can't find one.
But you've got me thinking with how there's blocks of JSON configuration in terminal. I work back and forth between Linux and Windows, and I've got a great tmux configuration that I like that's sitting there in tmux format. I'd love to be able to bring those settings and gosh, just do a script format and have it come into terminal so that when I'm on my Linux machine, I've got tmux the way I want it, and be able to migrate and have the same configuration in terminal, the same keystrokes that I use for splitting and moving around the panes and all that.
Yeah, that's definitely a future step that we'd like to take, especially for that use case, and also for like color schemes. If people want the same color scheme they have on their Mac terminal or something, or a Linux terminal, to just easily import it without having to change the format of JSON. So we'd like to make like a formatter that could take that blob and spin it into a terminal readable format of JSON, and then it would be really easy.
Yeah,
but we can't do that now. It has to be in terminal form or terminal JSON format right now.
We've got a schema declared. There's something that an aspiring terminal developer could write. Okay. Definitely. Gosh, it's just manipulating text. When you see folks start contributing, are they making little configuration updates and things like that, or do you see folks writing documentation, tests? Where do you want to see folks help out with terminal?
All of the above. I'm usually our docs writer if the creator of the feature didn't write the docs. Okay. So I always appreciate documentation updates. One big one that just came in was Oh My Posh just got an update. So our tutorial for Powerline was actually out of date and it didn't work. And then we got like a few contributions fixing it, and then I finally got back to the repo and added that change in. But it was nice because I didn't even catch that had changed. So it was great that people had come in and fixed that. But it also, like, new features or even changing small tweaks just to improve quality of life is so important anyway. Or even just like commenting on a spec or some design that we're working on is helpful, because we're just in our own bubble of like the 5 of us, and we're just trying to make it cool. And if the use case we can't even think of, or some other feedback that comes externally, that would be super helpful just for us to get a better view than just us looking internally. So that's even just comments is helpful too.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to take a few minutes here and show us some of those features around the new settings dialog and some of that JSON work in terminal?
I could try. We'll see if my machine wants to stay up while I share my screen. Let's see. I don't know if I'm too laggy or if this
No, I think we got it. There it is.
Okay, cool. So one thing that is coming that I wanted to share was that we're working on a lot of windowing improvements as well. So the one thing we added was you could do a new WT command and specify a new terminal instance to open in the current window. Sorry, my machine, the text will come in slowly because I'm streaming, but this should open a new terminal instance in this current window, which is new. So initially, if you ever wanted to make a new terminal instance with WT, it always had to be a new window. Now you can specify this window, my current window, or if I have like 6 terminals open, I can specify the 4th window, for example. And this also plays into, if I go to settings, which also in this release, we are making the settings UI default for preview. So that's another update. So instead of clicking settings and opening a JSON file, clicking settings will open the settings UI. I'm running 1.7, by the way, so all the new stuff is here for me. So another cool thing is in the startup menu, we have this new setting called new instance behavior, which is related to the windowing. So I can actually set any new instance of terminal to attach to the most recently used window. So I should be able to launch terminal again from like my start menu. It's on a different monitor, so you won't see my start menu. Let's see if this wants to play nicely with me. It should launch a new tab over in this terminal that you see on the screen. So I just clicked it. So we'll see if it goes over there.
Yeah, processing and streaming at the same time is a lot on our machines.
Yeah, there it is. So that works too. So if you if you don't want new terminal windows to open, you can specify it to open just here. And then I could probably get to JSON stuff.
I'm kind of the simple web developer person that while I was in the middle of a terminal the other day, I started doing Control T like you do to open a new tab in Edge or Firefox or whatever browser. And why isn't it opening a new tab? Oh, it's the Control Shift 1 and 2 to open because you have all the different profiles you can open with.
Yeah, and we actually added the shift modifier because Control T or Control V or something else could actually be used by a shell, and we don't want to just eat that key binding. Because I know Control V is sometimes used in Linux, and we had a lot of qualms about making Control C, Control V the default for copy and paste because that's what it is everywhere. And we had originally shipped Control Shift C, Control Shift V, but changing it to Control V by default would eat it from Linux, and then Linux would never get your Control V key binding if you wanted to send it there. But then we got so many, like an overwhelming amount of people saying, please just make Control C, Control V the default. Please, please, please. And then we were like, okay, like you win, we'll do it. And then we put it in your settings.json so you could see it and delete it if you needed Control V to do the Linux thing. So that's why it's Control Shift T.
Right.
Looping back around.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. Yeah.
And
go ahead.
I can try to get the extension stuff up. I'll have to go into my folder here. So I have this extension installed. Let's see if this wants to open. This might take a while. This will open in VS Code. It's a JSON file. Okay. So I have it here on this monitor. I'll scoot it over there. Here it is, a nice black box. But here I've actually specified settings to apply to create a new profile called Cool Profile, and then also edit my Ubuntu profile. So these extensions, you can make a new profile or reference an existing one using the GUID. And all the GUIDs should be the same from our generator anyway. Okay. So it should be pretty straightforward for editing a different one. So I create a new color scheme here at the bottom. And then this is for demo purposes. So like this one wouldn't work because it doesn't have all the colors. And then I'm also editing the Ubuntu profile to make my font size 16 and also the weight thin, because we ship Cascadia code with thin and bold font weights. But I think I deleted my Ubuntu profile. So we're going to roll ahead to the cool profile that I generated. I was testing this right before, so because I was like, there's no way I'm going to be able to share because of my machine. But it made this color scheme with the blue background. which you can see here. So it's using the Proto Extension color scheme that I've defined below. And then my font weight is also bold. So you can see that this is a bold font. And it's all coming from this cool profile from this extension. It's not in my settings.json. So that's kind of how it works. And we have a full doc on like, here's how to make one of these files and how to install it so the terminal can recognize it. That's all fully documented. And then we'll come out next week, maybe like Monday or Tuesday is the goal.
And then we're going to see lots of DevTO articles with people posting their profiles. And here, check this out. This would be really cool.
Yeah, exactly. And it's cool because this has been a heavy request of like, how do I just share my theme? Or like there's a picture of someone's background image with a color scheme. Like, how do I grab that? Now it's way easier to just say like, oh, here's the line that you install or this blob. And then in the same folder is the picture or whatever. And it works really nicely. So this is really big for us, at least. And then the windowing stuff is the other half of like what's huge with this release, because being able to interact with the current profile and have indexes of the other windows that are open, it gives us the underlying architecture for doing stuff like Quake Mode or doing tab tear out, because you can't tear a tab out right now. It'll just stay there. That's like next steps. So Quake Mode, Quake is the game Quake from years ago, and you're able in Quake, this is my understanding of it, I sadly have never played Quake, you can open a terminal window from the top of your screen by just hitting a key binding on your machine, and then it'll just pop up in terminal, and then you can just send it away. So that's a heavy request that we've gotten, and that's a little more intricate because we have to work with Windows itself to, like, if you're just on the machine and you hit something you want it to open. Or just like being able to pop open one window from the top of the screen and then send it back up. There's a lot of underlying stuff with that.
It's just Windows, code. Kayla. It's just a button.
Just do it.
Yeah. Your Microsoft hand wavy things and it just works, right? That kind of leads. There is a question here in Twitch chat that I want to make sure I go to from Adrian asking, what was it that you typed in at the start menu to launch terminal? Normally we would type CMD and we get the con host opening. How is it we launch terminal? I
typed terminal and open terminal that way. One of our eventual goals in the future is to have terminal launch when you type CMD, but that's also, we have to work with Windows, which is hard because Windows is large and we're like really fast paced on GitHub, just like sending code like left and right. So it's a little bit more of a process to get something in Windows. But that's the eventual goal would be like, let's have CMD open when you type CMD in terminal.
Yeah. Now, and coming back to GitHub for a second, what do folks need to know to get involved? You mentioned that a bit of the source is written in C++. Can somebody be a .NET developer and contribute here?
Probably. I honestly am not super familiar with .NET's whole framework, but I know if you know C++, that's really good for the backend stuff and writing terminal core features. But also, if you're familiar with XAML and WinUI, the settings UI, there's a ton of improvements that can be made on that side, and you don't ever have to touch C++. So there's two sides of terminal now that we've opened it up to, because before the settings UI, it was only, if you know C++, this is great. Otherwise, you'll probably have to learn C++. Now we can get a bunch of like front-end developers or like Windows developers who know like the UWP XAML side to get contributions in. And there's a whole contribution guide on our README of like, here's how you should install, Visual Studio 2019 and then install these extensions and then just clone the repo and it should just build. So that's like a good way to get started. And I was watching the previous chat, so I'm just gonna do it for us too. There's issues on GitHub that are tagged with help wanted, which is like, we probably won't get to this, but it could be easily done by a community member. Cool. So that's a tag to look out for. And then also the easy starter tag for people who are just getting into terminal and they want to see what they could do. An easy starter issue is something that is not too technically involved, but would give you a good knowledge of like what's happening in our code base. So those are the two I recommend to look at.
And this is great because as we look at .NET 5, .NET 6, and how much more you can do at the command line for folks that are WinForms, WPF developers, .NET developers, even Xamarin developers, as we look forward to .NET 6, the command line is a great experience for everybody. Do you have some tips, some productivity tips for folks that are just dipping their toes into using the new terminal?
I want to say my favorite thing is customizing the background image or the color scheme.
Okay.
Especially because if you're in different environments or you have different profiles open, it's easier to tell what you're in if it doesn't just look like a black box. So I recommend customizing those things first, either with the color schemes that come shipped, or you can install a new color scheme separately. I want to recommend the settings UI, but it's currently only available in preview. Okay. And preview is like, we'll put some experimental features in preview. It's fairly stable. Like I don't even have, in truth, I don't have plain terminal installed. I only have preview installed because I just use it every day anyway. But that's a good driver, daily driver for me. And I'm able to use the settings UI, which makes it easier to see what color schemes are installed, or I can click browse and find a background image I want rather than editing JSON. But we're still ironing out some of the kinks with the settings UI before we want to put it into stable. But I would recommend just customizing the appearance first, just so you know what shell you're in. And then you can get crazier with like creating new profiles that launch in specific directories, or if you want to do like an SSH profile, or if you install Ubuntu or OpenSUSE or any WSL distro afterwards, Terminal will make a profile for you. That's like next level. But for me, I just like customizing first to like get yourself grounded into where you're at.
Now, I have a couple questions from Twitter that I want to go to, but real quick, I want to ask you, my last question is going to be, one of the big features for me was being able to split the panes inside Terminal. Mm-hmm. Can you go over the default hotkeys for that real quick for folks?
Yeah. So let me clean this up a little bit. So my favorite way to do a split pane is if I open the dropdown and I hold Alt, I should get a split pane of that profile that I selected. So that's one easy way to do it instead of having, it'll load, I swear. Instead of having key bindings for each different profile. So that's easiest for me. And then I think Alt-Shift-B will duplicate the profile that is selected, or the pane that's highlighted. So if I wanted, I just duplicated my PowerShell profile here at the bottom. So that's another inbox key binding is Alt-Shift-D for duplicate. And then I think there's like split horizontal, split vertical ones as well, but I've customized those myself
a little bit. Yeah. I like doing this so that I have things like SAS automatically rebuilding CSS in one of those panels, and I have like a Blazor rebuild happening automatically in another panel. So everything's just kind of rebuilding, and I can watch it all at once. Mm-hmm. Awesome stuff.
Yeah, panes are really cool.
Let me go to a couple of questions that we have here real quick. We have a comment here from Miguel to start here saying, watching Kayla talking about Terminal, how the heck does a person so young have that influence driving a complex product like Terminal, only 2 years at Microsoft? Fantastic. Absolutely.
Thanks, Miguel.
Over here, Melissa, I believe that's how you pronounce that, writes, would be nice if the Oh My Posh or others could be easier to install and shareable as extensions. Coming soon, it sounds. I
agree. Like. Yeah, that sounds it would be possible with the new stuff coming next week.
Absolutely. And the last question I want to go to here is from Remy, writes, is it possible to have key bindings related to profile? Control-V on PowerShell tab and Control-Shift-V on Linux?
Not currently. Key bindings affect the entire app globally rather than profile to profile. But eventually we'll want to have extensions, like full extensions, where you can manipulate the full app or profiles and things like that. And I feel like that would be a good extension is like per profile. key bindings.
Very cool. Thank you so much for taking some time over lunch here to join us and talk about Terminal, all the cool things that are coming, Kayla. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.